A very good evening to all the enthusiast educators on Zoom platform as well as on Facebook. The discussion on NEP 2020 has started among the educators for a number of months now. There has been numerous articles on different print media, talk, panel discussions taking place on different platforms. Even students are also worried about the impact of the historic educational policy and its impact. Let us hear about its implementation from one of the veteran educator of our country. She has worked in the sphere of education, creative arts, special needs education, communicative English, street theater, women's education, peace studies, and curriculum development for over 4 decades. She has held several posts in India and abroad at both school and university level. She is a recipient of the prestigious National Teachers Award from the President of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, on Teachers' Day, and the Endeavour Award from the Australian government for her work in the area of Asia literacy, along with innumerable awards nationally and internationally. Former member World Council of Churches, Geneva for Education of Peace and Human Rights. On the managing board of several schools and B.Ed colleges across the country. I am talking about none other than the most creative and loved principal of Springdale School, Pusa, Dr. Ameeta Wattal. It is really difficult to read her 12-page resume. We'll read her inspirational resume for all of you sometimes later. Please take it over, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Pradipto. I hope that I am being heard by everybody and I am clear. Pradipto, am I clear?
Yes, absolutely. You're very
because
clear.
I got a small note. I was seeing in chat, there was somebody, I think from UNGA, Cuba, who was not able to hear the organizers. But
No,
I'm
you're
sure
absolutely
that,
fine.
Right. So thank you again for all those kind words. And every time I come to the ABEA, I feel that I've come home. So this is a great homecoming for me as always. And thank you again for inviting me for this absolutely wonderful masterclass. And it's so great that I'm here with the most remarkable teacher, educators, principals, managers, all wonderful people who many of whom I have met with and I have connected with, and I've always felt a deep sense of synergy when we've spent time together. Every time we hear the word NEP, which has been, as you rightly said, with so much has been said and debated about, and there's a certain fatigue that has come into people. Because right now, the main problem that everybody is facing is how is the future going to unfold? What are the board examinations going to happen? Whether it's a state board or whether it's a national board, how the children come back to school? And how are we going to fulfill the learning gaps in our children? So all this and more has become a very, what should I say, important part of who we are and what we are doing. And so the NEP discussions on that seems to be a little laid back in that context. But what I would like to say that I think this is a fantastic time for us to start working on how we're going to do the NEP, because there's a lot of connections that we have online with teachers. NEP itself talks about hybrid learning, and the very fact that we can spend some time, because there are so many activities in schools which are not happening, which take away a lot of our time, though the online does also. But we can start training teachers, start looking at how do we create these practices so that when the NEP comes up, we don't get hit by it and we don't start feeling that, we're sort of swimming around without finding any life jacket. And so I think it's very, very essential that we start looking at the NEP. The other thing I would like to mention, which I think is essential, is that, we keep thinking that, our policies over the years have worked. What's wrong with this? Why should we get involved with it? And so on and so forth. I mean, what's the big deal? It's a done thing. It's old wine in new bottles, or whatever it is that people think about. But the point is that something we have done is not right. something that has gone wrong. Otherwise, why would be in such disarray? And this is not about COVID. This is even before the COVID. We're in a position of disarray, whether it's violence, whether it's aggression, whether there's intense competition, whether it's the fact that the market finds children not fit enough to employ. So what is it? What wrong have we done in our schoolrooms? Because every time I talk to my colleagues or contemporaries, they say, we've done it, we've been there, we know it. Anything that you tell us, we've done it. Somewhere I think we have to examine ourselves, and even me, I keep examining myself and saying something that I'm doing may not right. And perhaps even the education that I may have received may not have been the right one. I wouldn't know, for the simple reason that look at the world around us, it's in a mess. And we are the adults who created it. So are we going to then create another mess where our children are going to grow up and become the kind of adults that we are today? So I think we have to really examine ourselves ethically. We have to examine ourselves philosophically. We have to examine ourselves through the lens of learning and say, what is it that we have not done right? You know, there is a certain concept in sociology called the routinization of charisma, which means that everything new becomes so routine. For example, the activities have become routinized. The assemblies have become routinized. The book weeks have become routinized. The way we track children in schoolrooms have become routinized. The fact that we are looking at experiential learning or project-based learning or ABEL or PBL, LLL, or all the abbreviations that we talk about, they have become routinized. Had they not become routinized, had they not become so sort of passé, we wouldn't be sitting here and having this conversation. So today, the kind of screen that you're going to see, and I'm so glad that teachers are here, because ultimately, you know, the teachers have become the heroes and the heroines of the COVID. The principals really have lost their identity, I think, though I'm a principal myself. But the principals, in a certain sense, have taken a back seat, and the person right in front is the teacher. And I think I'm so glad that the teaching community is over here with us. And the teaching community is the one who is going to make this NEP possible, is going to make this NEP doable, is going to make this NEP workable. Because the fact that the teacher was able to flip everything and get into the heart and soul of learning in online schoolrooms, I think that there is no challenge that the teacher of today cannot face. And so many kudos and congratulations to you, because you're going to be, and I hate that word warrior because I'm not a very violent person, but I think you are going to be the messiahs of the NEP, and good luck to you for that. So the kind of slides that I'm going to be showing now, and I'm going to be requesting Lata to start projecting the screen. So can we have the next screen, please? So I talked about suggested implementation. The first two slides are very simplistic, essentially, because what I'm trying to say very categorically is that we are a force to reckon with, the private schooling. We're not pushovers anymore. We're not that 10% or 20%. We are over 50% in this country, and every second child is a private school player, irrespective of what happens, irrespective of the fact that the parents aren't paying the fees and all sorts of strange things are going on. But we are very, very major players in this. And so it's extremely essential that we start looking at certain aspects of foundational learning. We start looking at preparatory years. We start looking at foundational years. We start looking at the middle level years, because those are the most important years that we need for learning. And because I do believe all learning is between 3 and 13. The rest of it is merely experience. And so today's presentation is essentially for the stage and age, starting from early childhood and going up to grade 8. So it's from a 3 to 14 or 3 to 13 spectrum that we're going to be looking at when we're going to be looking at this. So I would like you to measure this, because the way you look at your students during these years are the kind of gateway skills that you will create in them when they enter the senior classes. Because very frankly, when they enter senior classes, it's a very different ballgame. And so how are we going to look at it? How are we going to visualize this? And within every slide that is presented, there is a seed of a workshop, an entire workshop within every slide. So we'll have to see how So this is sort of a teaser as to how we can look at assessments, how we can look at the rubrics of learning, how can we look at learning matrices that we require in classrooms, how do we look at the stages and ages, what is the kind of foundations we need to have, and so on and so forth. May I have the next slide, please? So the next slide is just briefly, I'm telling you, you're going to be approaching the middle years, the preparatory stage, and the foundational stage. So this is what we're looking at, and you can see over here, because this is the new academic structure, and so we're looking at the age and stage. That's all I wanted you to think of, and then we can go further into the next slide. So the next slide, please, Lata. Right. So what are the highlights? Because by 2025, you and I are supposed to be having schoolrooms where certain aspects of the NEP have to be integrated, have to become integral to it. So every student that you have in grade 5 and beyond should have a basic foundational literacy and numeracy. Now you will turn around and tell me, because all of you belong to extreme elite schools, you belong to organizations and private schools which, which are speaking from areas of strength. And you say, but of course, our children have foundational literacy. That is the basic norm that we have in our schools. But my dear friend, that is not so. Because very often you will notice that by the time the children reach the middle years, that is 6th, 7th, and 8th, you will notice that a lot of teachers say, I mean, what happened in the junior school? Didn't you study over there? Didn't you understand mathematics? Why are your foundations very weak? Why are your foundations in language very weak? So what are the minimum that we require to need? For example, I know that in Peru, when we're doing reading, the children are expected to know that they can read 60 words a minute. Or there are other countries where a child is supposed to read more than 120 words a minute. So what are the examples that you're going to set for yourself in literacy and numeracy? What are the kind of examples that you're going to set in your classroom for saying that you're not just achieving, but you're going way beyond that achievement level as far as the national education policy is concerned. So this requires rigorous training of teachers, whether it's in-house or whether it is through outside agencies, but it requires tremendous training of teachers, because the way we are going to transact the NEP, and you'll see it slowly as we evolve, as we unfold these slides, is that each teacher will actually need to be a masterclass taker, a masterclass manager, a masterclass evolver of learning. May I have the next slide, please? May I have the next slide, please, Lata? Yeah. So when we're talking about planning and implementation, so what are the main features that we as a faculty, we as a school, so we talk about ready systems. Can you say today that, can you make up your mind and say, today I can launch the NEP in my school within 3 months, within 6 months, within a year? So what are your systems? Are your systems ready for that? Are your schools ready for that? Have you had conversations with your parents on readiness? Have you had deep conversations with your teachers as to what this would entail for them and how they need to be trained? So what are the deep dives that you have done to ensure that your systems, your schools, your teachers, parents are ready? Because a very important aspect of the national education policy is parental engagement. So when you have to create an entire parent handbook that guides parents through this policy and makes them engage with you, puts them on the same page. Because if there is no ownership with the parent community, if there is no ownership with your teachers, there is no NEP. So and then we will get stuck as managements. How will we go forward? Then it will become the blunder that happened with the CCE, the continuous comprehensive evaluation. The continuous comprehensive evaluation lasted for 5 years. People traveled far and wide, even I did, across the continent, trying to get people together, trying to speak to parents, trying to engage with them, ensuring that they became integral to what we're thinking. And yet, why was it that the moment that the exams came back, everybody wanted to dispense with the CCE, from government schools to private schools, apart from a handful of schools where a lot of elite private schools said, we're already doing it? It was dumped. It was dumped overnight. Now, we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen, because today the world has has completely changed. The way that we look at the competencies of children have changed. Today's children are in a very difficult spot. They're facing great challenges. We keep saying, oh, they're restless. Naturally, they would be. There is absolutely this tremendous aspiration. There's too many opportunities, and yet at the same time, there is intense competition. And at the same time, there is not enough engagement towards what is of value for how we should take this forward. So how are we going to strengthen our institutional capacities? How are we going to convert upon these policies? How are we going to... Now, the other thing is, why are we leaving it to, I think the principle is a very important factor in research, in documentation, in evaluation. The principal cannot step back and give it to the academic supervisor, give it to the teacher, tell them to train. The principal is the main source of dynamism. And if the principal doesn't know his beans, then nobody knows it. So it's extremely important that the principal does not step aside from training. And so the research, the evaluation, the documentation, the conferences, the workshops, all have to be tied up with the principal and with the mother agencies if they're larger institutions that have research centers who train. But I think other than the fact that you're training the trainer, the principal has to lie at the heart of the NEP. And unless they have a sense of ownership, they can't, because I know that every time I ring up a school and ask them a question about, this is before the COVID, that, you've sent me this particular circular, what is it about? Could you tell me? Because I want to send the children. And then the principal would say, would you have a word with my vice principal? Would you have a word with my academic supervisor? Why, for God's sake, you're running a school? Why would I want to have a word with your vice principal or your academic supervisor? I'm having a word with you. So the principal has to be extremely involved and has to be extremely connected to the sense of what the NEP has in store. May I have the next, please? So how do we look at a creative curriculum framework? What is the developmental milestones that we're looking at? What is the sense of belonging that I talked about? Now, for example, when I talk about transitions, now this is what I would like to know. When you are going to be creating a matrix of learning for your own classroom, what will that matrix have? What are the domains that are there in the matrix of your classrooms? So that your teacher will know, I am looking at this domain, a cognitive domain. I'm looking at a domain of literacy and numeracy. I'm looking at a domain of motor development. I'm looking at a domain of art integration. I'm looking at a domain of digital and digital technology. I'm looking, which would entail all information of AI or information of coding. So how have you divided your classrooms or stage rooms into what kind of domains, and how are they going to proceed? So when we look at this, what is the sense of belonging that we have as teachers to our classroom? Is the classroom arranged supportively? Do the children have materials that they can utilize? Are children actually learning through play? Because I have noticed that activities don't have reflection. And when activities don't have reflection, my friends, the activity is a goner. It has no meaning. Reflection. So do schoolrooms, and I know they do, but I think, do they have sound areas? Do they have feel areas? Do they have activity areas? Do they have reflection areas? Do they have areas of thought? Do they have areas of contemplation? So a classroom has to have zones where a child can function at different, depending upon their own needs and depending upon their own positions. So are children actually learning through play? Or is learning not happening? Is the transition happening smoothly? How do you know? How do you know what your learner profile is? Right in the beginning of class, every day, the first thing we do is we look at the learning outcomes, the learning objectives, or whatever you would like to call them. But I think the first thing we want to see is what kind of a learner is going to leave your class? Who is that learner? We should walk backwards. Who is that learner who should leave your school? Who is that learner who will transit from nursery to kindergarten, from kindergarten to 1, from 1 to 2? So what will be the difference in the transitions? Each milestone has a different transition. So how will your learner be different? How will the learner become self-directed in nursery? What is the area that will help him in a different self-direction in the kindergarten? Because developmental milestones don't remain the same. The work may remain the same. But the way you conduct your classes and the development milestones keep moving. So they make meaningful, how they make meaningful connections. What are the problems? So it's very, very essential that we look at these kind of milestones. And so what is the personal research that I am doing as a teacher to see my own child's developmental milestone or developmental transition? Do I have the time? I think it's very necessary that teachers have to be given time to have a look as to how children take on their own tasks, how they show their effectiveness, and what is the emphasis the teacher is giving, and on what is she giving in a classroom. May I have the next slide, please, Lata? The next slide, please. So this is just a very brief slide in which I'm going to talk about how a nursery class, my friends, is an instinctive class. Now, what is an instinctive class to you? What does instinct mean? Instinct means curiosity. Instinct means a start of self-awareness. So it's an instinctive class. You can't call it a class where it is of history. That's a different class area. And so how are you designing your classroom to become instinctive? What are the elements of curiosity that you are bringing in? And what is your role as a teacher? And how have you incorporated the community and the parent partnership into this instinctive class? Because remember, the child cannot be removed from the parent throughout the school. And I think the fact that the NEP talks about the parental engagement in depth is very essential. So what is the design for learning? How are different children learning differently instinctively? Because a lot of people will say, learning happens. Learning is an emotional experience. Learning happens because you love something. Learning happens when you love your teacher. You may hate the subject, but if you love your teacher, you will learn. So what is the conducive environment for the new age learning you're bringing in to bring about the instinct within children to start learning? The habit of learning cannot be separate. It is like your hand, your head, and your heart. Learning has to reside within you. The child doesn't like to go to school because learning is separated from the child, right? And so that is why a small child is weeping when he comes to school. He is most joyous when you have sort of tickled his instinct, when you have tickled the focus of the kind of learning that the child is enjoying. So let's move to another development. Can we move to another area, please? Another slide. Right. So let's look at this. This is a very important slide. So when we look, so I just moved from a stage of instinct to a stage of initiative, 3 to 6 years. So from 2 to 3 years, a little bit. Now we come to a stage of initiative. When I talk about the stage of initiative, what do I mean? I mean that this is the time when a child starts making choices. The choices. Earlier on, the choices were made by parents, by grandparents, by others. But by and large. But now the child develops an identity, a personality, a person. And so he creates for himself a learning laboratory. What is in that learning laboratory that you have? You have materials. Now, a material can be tactile and it can be non-tactile. A human being is a material. A thing is a material. A concept and an idea is a philosophical material, a metaphor for material. So how are you looking at the learning laboratory that you have created for your child? What are the choices that you have given that child so that he can choose the learning experiences from that learning laboratory? So do you encourage free play? I think a lot of us do not encourage free play unless it is outside the school rooms. But in the classroom, we do not encourage free play. So how do we create that learning? Through free play. So the pedagogical approaches through art, through play, through experiential learning, through environment, I think teachers should allow 15 type of pedagogical approaches, 100 type of pedagogical approaches, whatever approaches they can find, which suits whom. So it is very important that we must get involved with this kind of a learning experience. And so if I get back to my first slide, when I said that you have to first start spending time talking to parents and make their mindsets into growth sets, into heart sets, into growth mindsets. And so this is the time a lot of you are spending time talking to parents because of online learning. This is where you should slip in all the different pedagogical approaches that you will be using. And this is a great time because right now it is a lot of autonomy is given to you. A lot of autonomy is in your hands. I think the most fabulous time for teachers is when the students are from age 3 right up to age 13, because beyond that you get under the sort of draconian rules of a board. And so I think it's very imperative, because you will create the child who will be the adult of tomorrow. So how are you looking at the knowledge? What are the knowledge systems you're planning to build in? What is the learning matrix? Again, I'm asking you, what is the knowledge you're writing below the matrix? What is the competency and the value and the trust building? What is the decision making the child is doing? How many decisions does a child make in a day? Even if he's making a decision about which toy should I play? What rubrics are we designing for that decision? So what is the role that we're doing? So this whole initiative of stage of initiative is extremely important. And then how are we going to transit from this stage onto the stage of industry? Now, the stage of industry is a more involved stage. And at every stage, you will notice the key aspects are knowledge, skills, values, competencies, and learner profiles. Actually, it's a flip. You must know what is your learner profile, and from there move up onwards to how are you going to gauge those competencies, attitudes, values, skills, and knowledge, as is there globally as to how we look at children. When you look at the stage of industry, you're looking at investigation. You're looking at a community classroom, the classroom as a community. You're looking at understanding structure. You're looking at guiding learning. You're looking at knowing your children. You're looking at assessing learning. You're looking at building partnerships with families and peer connects. And during this time, I think the most important thing is that the content is merely the component of the knowledge of the curriculum, and the processes that you have already in place, which is so essential. And that is why, many of us who are in Ivy schools look at differentiated learning, and yet even within that, even within the structure of the Ivy school, there are children who pass out of schools and are not really evolving at the level of their potential. So what is it that we are missing? What is the factor that we miss out? So what is the context in which we are teaching? Are we teaching in the context of the environment in which they're learning? Are we teaching in the context of their home, their classroom, their community? If it's a Delhi child, is it a Delhi context? Does the child know the Delhi context? Does he know his region, and does he know his nation? So within what context is the child learning? Because everything in life is contextual, right? So the context and the concept, how are you synergizing these two aspects of contextual and conceptual learning in your classroom? Because learning across the board has to be thematic. So that's extremely important. And then when people keep saying that how do we schools and parents and children on the same page, it's again conversation, dialogue, changing the mindsets, constant conversations. There's no other way. Because if we don't do that, we're not there. And that is why, whether it is the supervisor, whether it is the principal, whether it's anybody, consistent conversations about how we can change the mindsets and the heart sets of people. May I have the next slide, please? Next slide. It's a very important slide. Now you will be saying, what is 4D for God's sake? We talk about 3D. We talk about length, depth, and we talk about So we have so what is the 4D? The 4D, the whole idea is about evocation, evolving. The fourth dimension is about memory. It's about feelings. It's about thought. It's about the spirit. It's about consciousness. So we need to bring about the 4D child, the whole child. Now, there's a very interesting book called Focus by a Hungarian writer, a Hungarian born American research scholar, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who writes about the whole understanding of a concept called flow. What is flow? And this is the flow that you and I have to bring into our classrooms to create this 4D child. So what is flow? Flow is the idea that people, it's a scientific fact, that at the most the human mind only process about 120 bits, right? Maximum. And we average 60 bits a second. So 120 bits a second is what the human mind can process, and we access about 60 bits a second, right? That is why we can't really understand when two people speak to us together. When two people speak to us together, we can't understand it, It sounds like a crazy stereophonic effect. Now, flow is when we are able to develop the whole understanding of curiosity, passion, focus, and concentration, and the child goes beyond the 60 bits a second and gets into a state where he starts loving what he does, and learning is not separate to him. It becomes a passion, it becomes an obsession, it becomes a absolute need to do it because he adores it, he wants it, or she wants it. That is flow. And that kind of flow can be seen in musicians when they lose themselves to music. It can be seen in athletes when they break world records because they get into the flow. It can be seen in teachers, because when teachers walk into classroom and a child forgets that time has passed, the teacher has taken him into a flow. There are some classes that are such a drag, and there are some classes that just you don't want to end. That is when you get into the flow. So if you want, and we want, to bring in this whole understanding of flow, then it is important that we get into the framework of what a 4D child needs. From a state of metacognition. What is metacognition? That thinking about thinking, learning about learning, being aware about awareness. That is what is metacognition. Is the child learning about what he's learning? Is he thinking about what he's thinking? So it's at a deep dive into how you do meta-learning. And that's how the growth mindsets happen. I know, because somebody has asked the question about rural India and so on, which perennially people are asking. I was on the board of selection of the national awards this year. And let me tell you, there were innumerable schools from rural areas. I cannot tell you the quality of schools that I found in rural areas. I would tell you very frankly that I thought they were unique, they were innovative, with hardly any resources, but they were creating 4D frameworks for the whole child, whether they were writing on the rocks in the jungle in their school, whether they were just painting the walls, whether they were just having these packaged magical boxes that were creating for their children. They were amazing. So it's not about rural India or urban India. It's about the teacher and how the teacher makes the parent believe that she's the best thing that could happen for her child, for his or her child. The moment the parent believes that, the mindset will grow. If the parent knows that you care for that child and love lies at the heart, I think the parent does hands off as far as this child is concerned. And I'm talking about grade nursery to grade 8. I'm talking about that. So I think the whole idea of rural and urban depends upon the innovation and depends upon the genius of the teacher itself. And so how do we look at this? How do we develop mindfulness and curiosity and resilience and ethics and leadership and values? And so that is the stage of meta-learning where a child starts thinking about the awareness, thinking about his observation skills, thinking about how he can go forward. And this is how a 4D framework for a child gets created. And we have to use all the 21st century pedagogies. Thank God 21st century skills have come out of some rotten cupboard and will come out into the open. Because all this while, they were lying around in seminars. We would just write over there, critical thinking or positive, whatever it is that makes the 21st century learning, communication, collaboration. We know these statements by heart. The point is, once we will take this and say, is this child learning critical thinking if I'm doing this? Is this child being able to understand ethics? Does this child connect with the other? Does the child demonize the other? When I'm teaching geography in a classroom, and I've said this innumerable times, and my child is wasting food, does my child, is he aware? And is he aware that there is a farmer who is maybe standing in 3 feet of water who may commit suicide because there is no distribution and production? And every time he wastes food, that farmer is nearer suicide. Does that child connect to the other, to the real world? That is what 21st century pedagogy is about. Every time a child or an adult does not switch off the light, does he think about that coal miner whose lungs are filled with black coal and who may be dead by the age of 32 because that's his life? So if we are not interconnected and we are not involved with the other, then we must forget about the whole understanding of the national education policy or the 4D framework for children. Because my friend Linus Pauling very categorically said, he was a Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry and peace. And he said the 21st century will be a century, should be a century of peace, of health and happiness. We have neither. And so the first thing we have to bring into our schoolrooms is mental health, well-being, joyful learning, happiness. Content will follow. This obsession with content will follow. Please understand that. So I think it's very, very important that we look at this framework. Yes, it is absolutely, you can do a 4D framework with 40 children. You can do a 4D framework with 110 children. It depends upon how you do it and how you create cluster classrooms and how you look at possibilities within this 4D framework. May I have the next slide, please? Right. So let's look at a 4-dimensional child and look at the learner profile as the child transits. Now let's look at the transition. So the child, when the child comes to school, why does the child cry? Because in spite of the fact that we may be a very fancy school with gifts and colors and all sorts of things and resources and all sorts of wonderful things, but we still have somewhere in the mind of the child, there is a sense of insecurity. There's a sense of not being one with the space. That is why there's no creativity, and creativity is finished because the child sees the school as the other. So one of the greatest transitions that you need to have is that when a child walks into the home, from the home to the school, is does the child see the school as a classroom and as a safe place? That is your transition from when he moves in. Okay. Are you building in self-reliance and confidence? How are you doing that? How are you building confidence in children? And how are you securing their identities? Making children visible. We're consistently trying to make children visible. But in spite of our greatest efforts, sometimes children don't become visible. In the best of schools, children say, but you know, I was the wallflower, I was not visible. You know, there's a very beautiful thing in the Ubuntu culture, and I think Unsa Ubuntu are very important. Because in the Ubuntu culture, there is a word which says, when you meet each other and you say, Sikona, how are you? And the response is, Sawubono, I'm here. I'm here. That means you have brought someone to life. The person is here. The identity of the child. You may make a child visible, but the identity, do we look at the identity? Are we creating things which are flexible and creative? Are we trying to help children to exhibit competency in technology? Now that in government schools is a different ballgame, and we have to look at that. So how are we looking at all this? How are we looking at this hybrid and flipped classrooms and flipped learnings? And is there a certain responsibility the child feels towards the environment? And if he did, then why are we in this mess today? If we did feel that environmental consciousness, then why are youngsters still burning the Amazon? Why are youngsters arsonists? What has gone wrong? Because young people are lighting fires in forests, and I'm talking about in Europe and so on and so forth. So a lot of things are happening, and the adults are lighting for other gains. So what has happened in our education system that we're not even looking at the sustainable developmental goals, which are integral to learning? So how are we influencing the heritage and the values and the blends of work and play? And how are we taking away indigenous learning from children? Everything is not English, for God's sake. We also have to look at the mother tongue of the child. If the child doesn't understand English, there are schools which say if the child doesn't understand English, punish him. But how will we connect with the child if we understand me? It's so important that in the early years, at least there should be some teacher who can teach, talk to the child in the tongue and not make it so rigid as in the colonial age. That, no, if you don't talk in English, then there's no learning happening. I'm not getting into the third language here. I'm just speaking about basic directions. It's a very important point of the NEP. It says, and I think that's a very good idea, which says at least 1,000 words a child should have by the time he walks out of school in some regional language. And it really helps. Because even if you know 5 words of a language and you go to Andhra and you know 5 words of Telugu, I feel very happy. Because the greatest thing is to connect to a human being through a language. The greatest honor you give to somebody is by learning their language, not necessarily their food, because the food caters to the stomach, the language caters to the soul, because it connects. So I think it would be great for us to create these little handbooks of interesting words like babble. In Spanish you have babble, and other semantics you have for and other things you have, different apps by which you do languages. I think it would help children immensely to do that, right? So I think we have to look at this. Is the child having this kind of a profile when he's transiting? What is refinement? What is improvement and qualitative change in the child? What did you notice in the child when he entered your class? And what did you notice when he left his class? What was there? What kind of attitudes were there? What kind of behavior was the child? So you can talk to the parent and say, hey, when the kid came in, he was like this. And look, you and I made a difference. Please make parents your partners. Very important for that partnership. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is again the objectives of the curriculum, I think, which is so essential that, align yourself with the developmental stages. Every stage, align yourself and see whether it's moving forward. And then learn through. And the student voice and agency is extremely important. What is the student voice? What is peer learning? In fact, in focus, Mihai says, the greatest focus have children work groups. Amazing. The greatest connection and the greatest creativity happens when children work in groups. So let's all work in groups. Let reflection be independent. Let it be separately, and so on and so forth. And we can go forward with that. So generating knowledge about the self, attaining a certain goal of foundational literacy, learning in groups. And the most important thing that I feel that is very important is that learning should never be separated from life, So it is a part of you, making learning a habit rather than an external imposition. So when a child walks into a room, he starts learning. He says, hey, there's a light here, there's this here. I mean, everything becomes a learning experience. He starts looking at the color, the texture, the wall. It becomes just a learning experience. And the awareness level becomes huge. The next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. So now assessments is a completely different area. But the most fantastic, the most exciting thing I feel is that we can do our own assessments. We can find rubrics across the board that will suit all levels of children at all types of assessments we can do with children. So we can define and identify the learning outcomes throughout. We can do it daily. We can do it in the beginning, in the middle, at the end. And we can do it at all levels, from abilities, knowledge, value. And I'm not saying assessment like, does he stand for the national anthem kind of assessment? I'm not talking about that kind of assessment. I mean, of course, it's great. You must stand for the national anthem. But the point is, I'm talking about the conscious assessment of a child, the way a child is potentially the learner. How is he a learner? How is he different from his friend? Not that he cannot do the same sums, or he can't manage the same kind of question papers. How is he different, and how do we focus on that transition? Because no child has to be left behind. So how do we select appropriate assessment measures and assess the learning outcomes? Because I have noticed one thing, that across the board, however fancy we are, however innovative we are, at the end of the day, we have a common assessment rubric. So there are multiple ways of assessment, and rubrics should be used that each child is assessed at his own level and potential. And so the confidence of the child has to be maintained, because a child sitting outside feels awful and he realizes, hey, I'm nowhere in the picture. I'm not saying give him a false sense of assessment, but at least you can say, well, this is what you've done and this is where you are in your own space. I think that's very, very crucial. So, and it's very important to analyze the results of the outcomes and to ensure that it's efficient and meaningful transitions. What is the point of assessing? It's important that if we assess, then when we transit, we inform people that this child has challenges and he has to be looked at, because no child can be left behind. It cannot be a failure. If a child fails, the system has failed. So why are we punishing the child if the system has failed? We cannot fail children. So we have to adjust or improve programs following the result of the learning outcome assessed, because assessment results are worthless if they're used. Because I've seen assessments just lying around, but we should know how your child moved from nursery right up to grade 9. How did he move? What were the adjustment and improvements that were made in that life of the child? What were the results of the assessment? Was it spread amongst other assessors, or were you the only assessor? Because sometimes in smaller classes, it's one teacher. So multiple assessors, multiple assessments to give the child space and place. So I think assessment within itself is a huge workshop with innumerable rubrics and learning ladders that we look at and how we go forward. Lata, could you please show the next one? Thank you. So there's one methodology. And I was just having a look at this. This is a kind of a learning ladder. So when you're looking at this, I mean, you're looking at the child assessing himself. You're looking at the peer assessing the child. You're looking at the teacher assessment. And I think we have to bring in parent assessment. How does the parent, because, you know, half the time the parent says, but at home the child is fine. So what's wrong with us? Is there something wrong with us? So that's where the parents have to be made to sit with each other and say, okay, if this is what you feel about the child, what is it that the child does at home that he's not doing in school? Again, creating a safe place in the school so the child reacts in the same manner. So ultimately, there has to be a reality check between what the parent is saying to you. And I don't believe that it is difficult. I believe that we have to not have a trust deficit with parents. There are certain methods of creating communication cards. There's the method of creating, organizers. The method of doing interesting things that we can get involved with for parental assessment, so that we can see how do I look at the child as a teacher? How does the peer look at the child? How does the parent look at the child? I think it's very important, and then assess the child in a larger rubric. And so in the first aspect, it's about inquiry. I can choose. I talked right in the beginning. I can choose. I can use different question techniques to focus or expand my thinking. And the child inquire, can he think? The second one is more of an ideating. Am I able to generate ideas? Are there possibilities and actions based on existing and new ideas? What is the reasoning? Can I analyze? Do I have a reasoning capability? Do I have a metacognition, which I talked about? Am I aware of the awareness? Am I aware of, am I a learner who understands learning? Do I reflect on my own? Does a child look at his own learning? Or that he can better understand what helps him to learn? So a child comes and says, you know, this is not suiting me. I think this helps me to learn better. That is what we have to encourage. This is not, I don't feel comfortable here. I think we have to understand this. So the collaboration, to see the value in working with us to achieve a goal. Can I work with other people? Can I maximize the use of my talents? Half of us don't know how to maximize their talents. So often when I do a talent search, I realize that teachers have the most amazing talents, and they're just lying there and they haven't been used because maybe they're shy or they're introvert. They feel if I go forward, then I'll be asked to work. But at the end of the day, I've noticed whenever a teacher's talent is recognized and identified, she shines bright as a star. So a child has to also maximize her own talents. And this comes for the teacher and the child. I think the teacher should put herself first on the rubrics before she puts her child. When she creates her rubrics, when faculties create rubrics, they should first do it for themselves. Can I use different techniques? Can I generate ideas? Do I have it? Why are you asking a child to generate ideas if you can't generate a single idea? So what are the ideas you've generated in a year? What are the new things you've done in one term? So why are you expecting your child to be innovative and creative? So can I analyze? Do I have a reasoning? Or am I so biased that I can't reason? Do I learning? Am I aware of my awareness? Am I a collaborative person, or am I just a single person who sits alone in my own class and doesn't communicate? I mean, you have all sorts of people who don't communicate, who don't even come into the staff rooms. So am I a collaborator? Am I a communicator? Because let me tell you, teaching is not a team playing. Unfortunately, it's not team playing. Now we become team players because of the online, and we have become exhibitionists now. But actually, teachers lock this doors and they're working on their own with their kids. So I think you should first assess yourself and then make rubrics for children and say, if this is workable and doable, it will be workable and doable for my child. And you will learn and grow from that. So can I have the next slide, please? So there are certain aspects of a holistic report card that I think are very essential. So when we look at the knowledge, what kind of knowledge is your report card reflecting? Is it interdisciplinary? Is it disciplinary? Is it epistemic? Is it procedural? Because there are also procedural things that are in the report cards. So the skills and competencies, are they being mentioned in your report card? Every skill and competency. What are the attitudes and values that you're looking at in your report card? And finally, what are the transformative competencies, the transversal competencies that meet the challenges of the 21st century? You know, how can a child reconcile tensions? Can a child take responsibility? Can he create new value systems? Can you think any child, even in a kindergarten, has the seeds of creating a better future, of shaping a better future? So how do I create a holistic report card? I think these are very essential to when we start looking at a new report card that we're going to create. So there are many interesting report cards that I've seen across time in 45 years of my being in this area of education. But I think more and more, we have to find ways and means of how we can gauge, because ultimately these children, the lives of children are not package deals. Yeah? They have within their pipes the sounds, the colors, the smells, the fragrances of its growing up years and of the humanity it meets. Right? And it is that adult, is that child who will become the adult of tomorrow. And so God knows what is the environment the child is growing up in. Can the school give him another environment? Can the school nurture him so that even if he's got a horrible environment, he feels there is one anchor I have, there is one lifeline thrown to me and I can grab it. We all need to have that. So handle those lifelines through your report cards. And remember, the report day is the worst day, was the worst day in my life. You know, it's one of the most aggressive days. It's a day of violence, if you ask me. You know, it's not Gandhian in its approach. The report card is not Gandhian in its approach at all, especially in the senior classes. It's terrible. And you're always seeing this child, you know, hanging at the back and a parent in front, and it's a difficult situation. Let the report card be a card of joy, a card of learning. Let the report card within itself, when somebody opens it, says, my God, this is a lesson. This is a new lesson for me. It's taught me. Let that be a new lesson. Let that be a lesson plan. Let your report card be a lesson plan. And I think that's very, very essential of how you create lesson plan type of report cards that teach you lessons about your child. Next one, please. The next slide. So think about the big shifts in your life, in your school. What are the big shifts? Sit as a community, say, what are the big shifts I want to have? Do I want to create these matrices for each classroom? What is the ownership, support, and capacity that I have for enabling me to go forward with the NEP? Remember one thing, never give problems. Everybody has the same problem. Everybody gives the same story every time. Some tutorial, some rural school, some this. Forget it. Okay. I mean, had mankind only looked at problems, today in many ways we would not be where we are. Right? We're out there in space. I mean, agreed, we don't have the vaccine, but we will get it. And yet we are a highly developed, evolved people. And so how are we enabling? So all content should be taught thematically, taught as a theme. It's so interesting. It's fantastic. It's like a mind map. And multiple pedagogical approaches for differential learning. And assessment will be consistent both in approach and analysis. And remember, no child should be left behind. And inclusion at all levels. And involvement of families at every single stage. When we look at this as a big shift, these are some of the big shifts that I think of. I mean, you can always think of greater big shifts than this, better shifts than this. What is the big idea? And so then work around, take 2 big shifts, 3 big shifts. But you have to say, this is my big shift, and this is the way I'm going to look at learning differently in my classrooms. And start it now. Start with 2 classes. Do a pilot. Start a pilot. Tell your parent that today I'm starting it with kindergarten A and with class 2B, like that. Try this piloting program. Nobody's going to mess with you at that point. It'll be very interesting. Next slide, please. Right. So the challenges are many, right? We have at every stage is a different developmental milestone, both physically, mentally, socially, and emotionally. Adoption of the NEP is only the first step. It will require long-term investment in human resources, in the mind, in the thoughts. It requires to adopt a curriculum that is consistent with the vision of your teacher, of your parent, of the authorities who run your schools, or even of those who are going to create your curriculum. And all staff members have to be familiar with your framework and have to buy in your developmental stages. And daily programs can be conducted for children. You can change them around. Everything doesn't have to be fixed. You can go according to the needs of the children. And so, of course, the lower ones are just simplistic things about the best ways to incorporate learning and how building and listening and speaking skills are developing and so on. These are just minor. So all I want to tell you is that, I want to, I think this is the last slide I have. And I want to end it by, may I have the last slide, please? I want to just end it by saying that, there is this Zen master and he with his monks, and you must have heard this. And one of the monks says to him, he says, what do you see over there? And the monk says, I see that there is a flag that is flying. And the other monk says, it's not the flag. It's not the flag that's moving. And he says, it's the mind that's moving. And the third monk says, he says, it's the wind that's moving. And the third monk says, it's not the wind, it's the mind that's moving. And for the 4D child, it's the consciousness that moves for a 4D child. So I think we have to look at the children where only flags move. There are children where flags and the wind also moves. There are children where the flag, the wind, and the mind moves. But we have to bring children where the flag, the wind, the mind, and the consciousness moves. And that is our jobs. And we must do it. We must do it because ultimately, the future of our children is all that we have. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wattal, for this very, very enriching and enlightening session, because I think the first now is the question everybody has in their mind is how are we going to implement the NEP 2020? And it's going to be an uphill and a mammoth task in order to implement everything that you've said, what the NEP says. And there are a lot of questions already that you've answered through the session. So I'm not going to really delve into all the questions at this point in time because Dr. Wattal has answered most of the questions. And the point is that with Dr. Wattal, ABEA is going to run in 4-session series for every age group, basically from kindergarten to the elementary school to the middle school, in terms of how you can frame the 4D framework for the child, how you can plan the curriculum, and how you can plan assessments to see how the 4D framework develops, keeping it the NEP 2020 framework in mind. So please do join us for the 4-session workshop, which we will be announcing during this course of this week. You can join and ask more of your questions. So at this point in time, Dr. Wattal has answered most of your questions. If you do have any questions, very specific, you can write to us and we will take it forward to Dr. Wattal. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Radha. I have to leave, as you're aware that I have to do another webinar in the next 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And thank you all. It's been great to be with you and talk to you. I wish I could have some more, I could have had a face-to-face, but I think remarkable. And I just want to again say that the teachers are remarkable the way that they have worked. And I think that there's nothing that they can do. And if we just go slowly and surely in sort of staggered manner, there's no way that the NEP will not be a success. It will be a great success, but we need to work through it slowly, and not rush through.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And I'm leaving with your permission. Thank you
Yes,
all.
thank you.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
and
Dr.
thanks. God
Wattal.
bless you
Yes,
and
thank
keep
you.
shining. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And we'll keep you posted about our future workshops with Dr. Wattal. Thank you so much.